Hey everybody, welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm Matt Connerton, and of course to my right, once again, the Honorable Gary S. Hopper.
You got that right, Matt.
Do you like the dramatic pause?
That was better.
Something new I'm trying out.
Right. We got to keep trying stuff new.
Yes.
'Cause we don't,
We're innovators.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
We're like right on the cutting edge of something.
Right. That's what I think.
But are we allowed to have cutting implements in the studio?
I think so. We can't have food. We can't have open containers of
Can't
beverage.
have food,
Well,
right?
that's fine because it's got a container.
Oh, good.
But I don't know about the cutting stuff.
Right.
Cutting
we'll
edges
probably
and
have
stuff.
to check with management to find out if we can be on the cutting edges and stuff.
And honestly, I'm a bit of a klutz,
Right.
so it might be dangerous.
We talked about that. He went shooting with me over at my house, and he was really nervous because he's klutzy.
And I'd never shot a
Actually,
gun before.
I would think that you would be nervous if he's really klutzy.
Oh yeah, no, I'm brain dead, so it doesn't matter.
Nerves of
But
steel.
he did good. I don't think he killed anybody.
No, not that day.
No. Anyway, tonight we're talking with Hal Shurtleff, and he's got a friend,
Dan McGonigal.
Dan McGonigal.
Dan Vincent McGonigal III, author of, what's your book?
Execute the laws to restore the
You can hold-
republic.
You can hold it up if you want. Plug your book, man.
Camera's there.
Oh, you,
Yeah,
got,
well-
you got plenty of cameras here. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. You got options. Yeah.
This is a high-tech studio.
What is
That's right.
it? What is it called again? I can't read. So
Execute the laws to restore the republic. Execute the laws is in quotes from the Constitution.
Okay. Very
you're
good.
going to have to introduce yourself again because I still can't remember how to pronounce your last
So
name.
I'm Representative Frank Edelblum from Hillsborough
Edelblum,
District 38.
Edelblum.
Remember we did that whole
We
thing
did.
with the song
Yeah,
and
oh,
everything
yeah.
else last week.
That's
Full
right,
big
right.
production, yeah.
Yeah,
it was
that's
fun.
right.
It
Okay.
was fun.
Oh yeah, now I remember. Right?
I remember.
Okay.
I think I posted that on Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades, the posting. I put the song down below it afterwards because I'm trying to remember, but
How to say the name?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But I get brain damage, so it doesn't help. Like,
Drain Bramage.
yeah,
Right.
wicked bad.
Actually, can I just point out that Gary gave one of the funniest speeches I've ever heard on the floor, on the House floor today.
Really?
Oh, it was great.
Bear in mind he's new and he hasn't heard that many speeches on
Right.
the floor.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so it was
But
the
other
only
than that-
humor we got all day.
it was new to Frank. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, well, I have fun.
Well, I'm
you know?
curious now. What was this? I'm not asking you to repeat the whole
Oh,
speech, but
it was. This is where I run into issues with the House Republican Alliance because I believe in capitalism, but I think if it's not based on moral principles, it just leads to a different form of tyranny.
right.
So
Any-
he told a story about his wife kicking him out of the
So-
house, and it was pretty good.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So
It's a fictional story to be may happen in the future.
yes.
Ah,
Just to
yes.
be clear.
Theoretically. Yeah, no, there's a bill in Judiciary Committee that I was asked to do the PI, which was basically to wrap up just before people vote. And the bill was to require or to allow landlords to get first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. Currently, the law is they can get first month's rent and a security deposit. Now, business-wise, that seems is constitutionally and everything. I get that argument, but in a practical sense, rents are so high right now. If you got somebody who's making $8 or $9 an hour, you're talking $1,000 a month for rent, which is half of their money they get every week.
That's cheap for Boston, my goodness, 1,000.
Yeah, but they get paid more in Boston
Oh,
too,
yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
relative. But so they get $1,000 for rent, which is around minimum, and then they have to come up with a security deposit, which is up to a month's rent. So that's
Generally a
another
month's rent,
$1,000,
right.
and then another $1,000. So if you're making $8 or $9 an hour, coming up with $3,000 is, as far as I'm concerned,
A knockout factor.
is a knockout punch. You're homeless.
Yeah.
And so the HRA asked to overturn the committee report, and I voted against the HRA today. And my PI was, now I'm going to forget it now that you asked specifically.
You want me to remind you?
It was basically
a time will come when your wife boots
yeah.
you.
I know that eventually my wife is going to smarten up and boot my butt out. at which time I will have to come up with basically 3 months' rent on a legislative salary, and I don't think that's reasonable. So I ask you to support the committee and defeat this bill.
Yeah.
There we go.
Right.
It was great.
We'll find a room for you if need be. So,
Thanks, buddy. Yeah, I
keep
heard
in mind.
a lot of invitations afterwards because they knew that threat was probably more real than not, but it's not really.
Gary's wife doesn't watch the show, if anyone's wondering.
Yeah, she never
doesn't
watches
want
the
to,
show. She was really sick earlier this year, and I think I said, what did I say on this show that I was starting to look for a replacement because I don't think she's going to pull through.
Right. She wouldn't be able to make dinner or something, yeah.
So yeah, luckily she never watches the show. If she ever does, then that
Yeah.
statement
then
I made today on the House floor
yeah.
is very apt to
could
come
be a
true.
self-fulfilling prophecy if you're not careful.
Let's see. I gave the lady from the American Civil Liberties Union a hard time yesterday. There was a bill to to eliminate abortions after 5 weeks. No, 4 weeks and no. Sorry, 20 weeks and 5 days. I think it is.
Okay.
And so a doctor got up who was opposed to the bill. He used to work at Dartmouth, and he said that children start feeling pain at about 25 weeks to 28 weeks, which I don't believe is true. I think it's actually earlier than that, but that's when he said the brain's developed enough to feel pain.
Mm-hmm.
And an abortion was described in committee. And so when the lady from the ACLU came up, my question for her was, I know that the American Civil Liberties Union has gone through great pains to try to discourage torture at Guantanamo Bay. And we just heard testimony that a baby can feel pain at 25 weeks. We also heard testimony that a late-term abortion means basically dismembering the child in the womb. My question for you is, why doesn't the ACLU consider that cruel and unusual punishment? She didn't.
She didn't answer.
She tried. She started stumbling and stuff like that, but it's a legitimate question. It is.
It's
horrific.
a real question.
It is a real question. I mean, she didn't. You could tell by her response. She was kind of nervous and stuff in the response, so she wasn't ready for that one. But I had fun asking it, so that's all I care about.
Because if you're having fun, that's
If
all
I'm
that
having
counts.
fun. Okay, so anyway, we didn't invite to you guys on the show for that. So I'm going to have Matt read. This is an Article 5 convention. So first we're going to have Matt read what the Article 5 of the United States Constitution says. Then I'll pass it over to who wants to go first?
Your show.
Okay. I'll figure it out.
You can
then.
decide while I'm reading.
No, can't.
Actually, he's okay reading.
Yeah.
He's got that.
I really enjoy reading aloud. Actually, I should audition for the new NBC News anchor spot. So,
Were
all
you
right,
ever shot at when you were in a helicopter?
I think I might have been actually.
Was it the following helicopter,
I don't
or
re-
was
I
it a
don't re-
helicopter ahead of you, or
It doesn't matter.
no? It doesn't matter as long as you were shot at.
That's right. Yes,
Right,
I can
exactly.
imagine that. All right, so I'm reading this.
Yes.
Okay. Article 5, U.S. Constitution. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. That is the longest run-on sentence I've ever read.
They all like that.
I know, yeah, yeah.
Well, that was, you
This is
see,
our Constitution here.
there was a high rate of literacy back then, so what we would call a run-on sentence today would
Yeah.
not be considered a run-on sentence. So.
That's true. That's true.
Okay, so let's start with Frank. What is the purpose of Article 5? What was its intent in your eyes?
Right. Well, actually, so there's a couple of different elements in terms of how it came about, and so a couple of different intents. But the basic gist is, we've got this Constitution that's come to us.
Right.
We might need to fix it as we go along, and so we made provision in the document itself in order to be able to correct any issues or deficiencies that we think we might come across. And so in the history of the country, we've got 28 amendments that have been passed to the U.S. Constitution.
So why did we give women the right to vote? No, sorry.
Because they deserved it.
Oh, okay. Good one.
Thank you.
Good, answer. Good. Well done.
Good
Yes,
answer.
yes,
Yes.
He's right on it. Yeah.
It sort of backfired. It was sort of a socialist movement, and they figured women would promote socialist causes. And just the opposite is true, because a lot of them were strong pro-family types. So
Yeah.
it sort of backfired.
Yeah.
Just like the initiative petition, which is another progressive thing back in the turn of the last century. They thought, we'd be able to.
What is the initiative?
Well, where people can write laws, get them passed without the legislator involved. And of course, it works both ways. You can get good stuff passed as well as bad
What
stuff.
is that? I've never heard of that.
Well, Massachusetts has it. About 20 or so states around the country have that process.
Oh, you mean like
You don't need a legislator to introduce a law, basically.
You get about so many people
Citizens
sign
can
a
do it.
petition. It
Yep.
goes on the ballot for a vote, and then
like California, they're a
propositions.
Propositions.
Yeah.
State.
Okay.
I mean, they work both ways. It could be good or it could be bad. But,
Yeah, like-
Depending on who's
But the
proposition.
progressives thought we'd be able to overturn the Constitution by this, and it didn't quite work as well as they thought.
Yeah, I know in California the problem is they can do the petitions, and so they'll petition the government to add all these benefits, and then there'll be petitions to say we're not going to pay any more taxes.
So now they're between a rock and a hard place, right? You know,
Right.
we promised all this stuff, but we don't have money to pay for it.
We want everybody to have a Cadillac, and we're only going to give you 20 cents to do it with.
Right, exactly.
So, okay, so that was its purpose, is to amend the
To provide a vehicle, some structure about how we might amend the Constitution, and they basically are providing two different ways for us to do that.
Right.
Okay.
And the first way is through the Congress
Right.
doing it, but the Congress is not going to amend the Constitution to subvert its own power.
Well, I think it would be naive to think that the Congress is somehow going to subvert its own power and cede power really back to the states and the citizens. It's interesting, if you look at the amendments that we have,
Right.
so 14 out of the 28 came about because the states started the action first. They passed
28 or 27?
out of the 27.
Yeah, okay.
So the
Well, he's getting you on technicalities.
No,
already.
well, he got me that technical. I made a mistake, so that's okay. Don't
Yeah,
lose
no,
that
no,
presentation
all right.
I gave you.
Yeah.
No big deal.
So, yeah, right. Do it.
He's jumping the gun. That's what Wolfpack already has, a 28th Amendment all set to go, right? So what-
Okay. And-
Okay.
This isn't about Wolfpack, but anyway. So what happened is, 14 out of the 27, the states initiated a process. They passed bills and saying we're going to amend the
Give
Constitution.
me an example.
So, well, I mean, how about the hang on, 21st,
Which is
the repeal
of
of prohibition,
okay, so
or
so
how about suffrage was one of
No,
them?
no,
Income
let's-
tax was one of them. Let's stick with income tax. That's a good one.
the repeal? I'm Irish, so the repeal
16.
of the prohibition on alcohol seems
Yes.
more logical to me. So basically, the state said this is stupid.
Yep.
I don't care what the federal government does or is saying about this because this is just insane. And so the state started a process of
Correct. So they
amending.
start a process to amend the Constitution. And the way that article reads is you need to get 34 states in order to agree on the same subject in order to get Congress to call that amendment convention.
Okay.
Right? And so they start the process. And typically what happens is the states start the process, and eventually the Congress gets wise that, hey, we better not let this get away from us. And so then they act on it.
Okay.
And sometimes they give us what we want, sometimes they don't. It's interesting, actually, that's how we got the Bill of Rights, the original Bill of Rights.
How so?
Well, so we've got the Constitution, and before the Bill of Rights was passed, you actually had Virginia and New York passed resolutions in their states saying, we need these 12 things to get
Be
passed.
enumerated.
Exactly. And Congress then acted. They gave us 10 out of the 12, but again, initial initiative of the states at kind of pushing the Congress along there,
Okay.
which I think is actually not a bad thing. You know, states have to flex their muscles every once in a while and say, you know, to the federal government, you guys got to get in line. Time
Right.
to do something.
Right, absolutely.
I'll tell you, as a freshman legislator, I was shocked, to say the least. I was on I was working full time, and I was on the Fish and Game Committee. Okay, so because I got Fish and Game because it had basically a low quantity of legislation that they have to deal with. I was on there, and a bill was introduced by basically it was through a legislator by the department to require you to have your Social Security number on your Fish and Game license. And I knew the people from Fish and Game, and I didn't understand why would you,
yeah.
why? You know, your name's on there, you've already paid for the license, you really don't need that kind of information on there. And it turns out that the federal government had threatened that they were going to withhold funding if that was not included. Just like later on, you know, we now have to pay to go fishing in salt water, which was never the case when we were growing up.
Right.
Same thing. The federal government threatened to do something, and it was constant extortion by the federal government. They took, you know, my tax money, and then they used that tax money to extort or to blackmail my state into doing things it wouldn't otherwise
I would tell
do.
you, Hal and I probably agree 100% on that.
Well, the
You know,
federal
you're
government
wrong.
does it all the time.
Yeah, we
And
send
the
them our
states,
money.
unfortunately, have said, let's go, because states have been a willing accomplice to this overreach of the federal government.
Right. Yeah, that's part of the problem.
That's
is
right.
the states say, oh, yeah, give me more money, and there's all kinds of strings attached to all of
Chains attached.
Yeah.
we
Chains,
take
yes.
take our money, we send it to Washington. They send back part of it with strings attached.
it. Yes,
you know,
exactly.
That has to change.
Yeah, that has to change. So I get it. There should be a point at which the state can say, no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So anyway, Hal, or what's your name again?
Dan.
Dan.
The Article
wants to-
5, first off, Article 5, the second part dealing with the convention, it doesn't say specific amendments. So state legislators may pass resolutions calling for a convention for X issue of Hawaii issue. There's actually been some call for a general convention. Like the very first one, I think it came out in New York and then Virginia. The first two were for general, what's an for specific purpose. But probably since after the Civil War, there's been a lot of calls with a specific amendment in mind. However, a convention doesn't say it's limited to any one thing or any type of issue. And that's the biggest issue, the big issue here. We could have a convention, we'll just discuss this one amendment, and we'll all go home, and we'll propose an amendment, will go to the states, and it's no big deal. This amendments convention is a very serious deliberative body. They're there for one person, one reason, is to propose amendments to the Constitution. And now right now there are no laws or rules guiding such a convention. There's been a few meetings of like-minded groups. ALEC, I think, American Legislative Exchange Council, your people have participated. A Mount Vernon meeting, and there was a meeting in Annapolis, and there was one was it outskirts of D.C. back in December. This was not a bunch of states coming together. These were individual private citizens.
Yeah.
Any agreement that's made prior to that can be changed at the convention.
Yeah.
In fact, if you Rob Nadelson,
No.
No.
well,
Okay,
no,
well, anyway,
yes.
wait,
Rob
wait.
Nadelson, who was the sort of the patron saint of this movement, even said so at the ALEC convention. Robert Bork, the late Robert Bork, who is regarded by Mark Levin as the greatest legal mind, he had in 1993, he wrote a letter and he spoke about this, and he said that this convention can ignore any laws and rules. And on at least three occasions, Congress tried to make laws guiding an Article 5. Orrin Hatch, back in 1979, who wanted an Article 5, right?
Right.
He convened hearings, and I actually have the document, 1,300 pages, and they had professors from both sides of the spectrum, all kinds of people, talking about, we don't want this. Not everybody, but a lot of them. So they did indeed try to control it. See, Congress not only does it call it, but it has in Article 1, Section 8, they make the necessary and proper clause. So they think they have control over it, because if that wasn't the case, you wouldn't have these hearings. In fact, one of the bills passed the Senate, but it didn't pass the House.
Right.
And then in those days, we were about 2 states away from the 34 states needed to call a convention.
Well, why would the Congress, other than making sure that they have the convention or orchestrate arrange the facility, whatever, other than that, as far as I'm concerned, logically, the Congress should have nothing to say about it.
Well, what's right.
Because, again, if we go back to the intent of this, is so that ultimately the states can tell Congress to pound sand. Well, they can't tell them to pound sand if Congress can politically make maneuvers to regulate, to control the process.
Well, what I'm saying is that Congress at least thinks it can, because they wouldn't have these hearings. And even
Congress
if they did,
can do a lot of stuff.
that's right. But even at this convention, I mean, we only had one convention under the Articles of Confederation, right? And Article 13 of this convention of the Articles of Confederation said that to pass any changes, you had to have the several states had to agree. All states had to be on board.
Right.
Well, they changed it. I'm glad they did change it, and they proved that this sovereign body had the right to do that. They said we'll just have 2/3, right? And 2/3 of the states passed it, became part of the law of the land. So that's the precedent we're facing. And we contend that it's quite possible that these delegates may try to change the mode of ratification to a simple majority. And we don't know. It may not happen, but it could happen. And we don't know who these delegates are. We have all this confidence. The folks that want one, we trust the American people. Well, they don't know who's going to be at this convention. They have no idea how it will even be done. Will they be elected?
Right.
Will they be chosen by the governor? Will they be chosen by the legislators of the states? We don't know yet.
Right.
There's a lot of unknown factors here.
Right, but it would seem that the states and the could decide who they have going
That's
there
correct.
any way they want.
That's correct.
And I don't see why that's a
In fact, there's
detrimental variable.
There's a bill that's been proposed here in New Hampshire to guide in Article 5 delegates to a convention. It looks awfully nice that if they don't do this, they'll be recalled or they'll be subject to punishment or what have you. But they get down to that convention, Congress can grant them immunity. In fact, in April of last year, there was a Congressional Research Services report that said such a thing. What if they do things in secret so that we don't know how they voted? And how are you going to enforce a law that's committed outside of the state? Are they going to send state police down to arrest these people or pull them out of the convention? No. But
So
let's look at the premise here. I agree. Listen to the Convention of States. We have an utter control, for the most part, federal government. There's no question about that. Well, who's responsible for that? How did that happen? Every 2 years, we elect members of the House of Representatives, right? They're supposed to do the bidding of the people in that district and obey the Constitution. Right, they're supposed to have like a 6% approval rating, except for their member of Congress, who we all love, right? Because they bring home the bacon or whatever.
Right. That's why we have a 90% incumbency.
So
rate.
and states are willing participants in this. States, governments, hands out. We need highway money. We need money for schools. We need money for all these projects. And look at Common Core, for example. States said, we don't even know what this is, but give us the money and we'll take it.
Right.
So what if states just said, no more, we won't do this anymore? That's one way to get the balance back. The balance was not, it isn't that the feds came in here with troops and said, we want to take control. The states gladly gave it away.
Yeah.
Right. There's a mindset. We don't have a constitutional mindset in this generation. We made a lot of progress, but we got a long way to go.
Okay. Dan.
Yes, sir.
What's your 2 cents worth?
Can I borrow?
Or 3.
I want to quote part of Article 5 first, because you read
Well,
it.
with inflation, it's more like
earlier.
10 cents now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Before I get into a few words about constitutional enforcement, just want to repeat the last sentence of Article 5. Okay. Now, this is what's applicable, because there's a part in the last part of Article 5 where the gentleman mentioned 1808. That part, if you put it in parentheses, is not applicable
That's right.
anymore.
That was dealt with taxing slaves, and they passed a law,
So,
the importation of slaves, and they passed a law in 1807, went into effect 1808. So that part is no longer valid.
Okay.
So if you deleted that and then read it again, it would say, provided that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. So that there, provided that, is the single restriction on amending the Constitution.
Correct.
Meaning the equal suffrage in the Senate means every state,
Gets 2 senators.
you cannot amend You cannot amend and say, okay, Texas will get 3, California will get 5, and Massachusetts,
Can't we amend
New
it?
Hampshire
What-
will get 1.
Can't we amend
U.S.
it
Senator.
to say that New York doesn't get any?
That
Just an
would-
idea.
But you know what? They
So-
threw this out. The populists at the time were pushing for an Article 5 convention, trying to get the popular elected senators to be popularly elected. And they were within one resolution from making it happen. And so Congress passed the amendment, and it went to the states. It was ratified. So the state legislators gave up an important part of the checks and balances because of this populist cause and the threat of an Article 5.
Okay.
So if you flip that around for its further meaning, everything else in the Constitution can be amended.
Yes.
Except for this one restriction of equal suffrage in the U.S. Senate.
Right.
Okay, that's the restriction.
I get it.
Okay.
I thought suffrage had something to do with getting like hurt by my wife and stuff.
Suffering, right?
Suffering.
Pain and suffrage, yes.
Yeah, pain and suffrage.
Regarding constitutional enforcement, I've been studying the scholarship of Dr. Edwin Vieira since 2008 when I heard him speak at.
Who is he?
He's on that Food Network show, I think. You know?
No, he's won several cases in the United States Supreme Court.
Okay.
He's got 4 degrees from Harvard, PhD, JD, and he wrote 2002. He wrote a 1,700-page book on the power of the purse, and 2012 he published a 2,300-page book on the power of the sword. So those are the 2 ancient powers: the power of the purse and the power of the sword.
Okay.
And he recently just published, 2014, 600-page book on martial law.
Okay.
And
Guy writes a lot.
What's real?
Clearly, that's
What's
I
real?
think what we can take away
yeah,
from this
what's
is this
real
guy
martial
writes a
law
lot.
and what's false martial law? So,
Right.
regarding the Article 5,
Right.
in September 2013, he wrote this commentary on newswithviews.com. That's where his archives of commentaries are.
Yeah.
Title: Enforcement, not amendment, is the answer. So that's what I meant before when I mentioned to you.
Read it again, please.
Enforcement, not amendment, is the answer.
That would be the better answer. I don't know that it's the only answer.
And then in April 2014, that was September 2013. April 2014, he wrote another commentary, Article 5 Convention, a Titanic Irrelevance.
Titanic irrelevance. Okay.
Right. You'd have to read them. There are a few pages. They're not that long, but you'd have
So
to
they're
read them
not
to
like
get
the
where he's at.
600-page other stuff he does.
Well, if you get kicked out by your wife, then maybe you'll have plenty
I'll
of
have
time.
plenty of
Yeah,
time.
So-
yeah, you can catch up on some reading.
You know, what else are you going to do? You know, under the bridge.
Right under the bridge.
Cardboard box.
Yeah,
Cardboard
yeah.
box.
In this enforcement, not amendment commentary, he mentions Mark Levin in here. And I just want to say briefly, I'm going to quote one sentence from it.
Yeah.
But looking at our existing Constitution, as I see it, the root issue here is enforcement of the Constitution and the lack thereof.
I agree. I agree that that's a
Okay.
big deal.
It is not, the root issue is not to change our unenforced Constitution. Changing it will not give you enforcement. Because as I'm gonna mention, I'm gonna go further and I'm gonna say where the enforcement already exists in there, but it's not being applied.
Right.
It's there,
Okay.
but it's not being, it hasn't been applied for a long time.
Well, I don't know how much time we're going to have to get into that part. Because fundamentally, I agree that part of the problem is states aren't. I'll give you an example. Remember, I told you about the saltwater fishing thing.
I was a saltwater fisherman. I had a boat in Boston, and we didn't have to pay for licenses. Yeah.
And I got up on the House floor when when the Democrats passed that, and I said that the federal government has no right to enforce or implement a saltwater fishing license on somebody who's sitting on the dock in Hampton Beach with a fishing rod and with their grandkid. They have no constitutional right to do that. I think, as a legislature, we should show some nerve and
Tell them to pounce
fight
in.
them. Tell them to pounce in and fight them.
May I
Nullification, right.
quote this just one sentence from Dr. Vieira? And
Okay.
then- Okay. Each state at this very moment retains reserved powers under the Constitution to execute the laws of both the Union and the states, where the term laws includes the Constitution. Now, that's from Article 6, Clause 2, where the Constitution is included in the laws of the Union. The states and we the people have reserved powers, but as I said before,
We don't use
they're
them.
not being applied.
Right. I understand that. Like that's what I said. I feel like we should have leaders who, from attorney generals to whatever, that are willing to go and fight back against the federal government. But you had a bunch of attorney generals that fought back against the government over Obamacare, and the Supreme Court just worked their way around that to allow that to pass.
Yeah.
They changed what the administration said clearly was not a tax to get it through, and then when it went to the Supreme Court, they said it was a tax. It was I don't know.
Mind gymnastics.
Well, New
Mine-
Hampshire nullified, they say nullification is one under the 10th Amendment. It says basically what the states aren't forbidden to do and what the powers that are granted by the Constitution to Congress or to the federal government, the rest are retained to the states or to the
Correct,
people.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot of stuff because
Right.
there's only about 30 powers of Congress in Article 1, Section 7 and 8. The president only has a handful of powers.
Right.
This notion that he or she the most powerful man in the free world, that's not the job description. They have
No,
a very
it isn't.
limited job description. And the Supreme Court is not the law of the land. Congress is the law of the land because it says so in Article 1, Section 1.
Right.
But that's all been tipped upside down. And the problem isn't the Constitution. It's the fact is that most people have no clue. They have no idea what the Constitution says.
Right.
And we demonstrate this all the time. We do our information tables and have basic questions.
Because we're just kind of running on here.
Yeah,
Is that-
yeah. Actually, you haven't had much. Yeah. Let's.
I haven't I got to say anything,
Sorry.
have I?
Huh?
Other than, are we going
You
to talk about the
started.
recipes that he's got in his cookbook over here?
No,
Right,
no.
yeah.
Anyway, anyway.
State statute will fix restore the reserve powers. You don't need a constitutional convention.
Anyway.
And it's important. I think you got nullification. I think you've got these other ideas, which are, well, I'm kind of a soup guy. As long as we're going to keep it on the food thing, all of these ideas are good ideas. We need to be pursuing every single one of them.
Right.
Article 5 is part of the Constitution. And so it was put there. So if we're going to follow the Constitution, that would imply that we would follow the words of Article 5, not just the words that we're unafraid of, but we would follow the words even if we think that we're afraid of some of those things. And it's interesting because I know Hal is, not happy with the whole concept of Article 5.
Correct.
And he thinks that that's
No, not
something
the
that-
whole concept, the convention.
Yeah.
He's uncomfortable with that. And he
In
has-
today's climate,
Right. I know. Go ahead.
Yeah, so and I'm not interrupting you at all. I'm letting you kind of have your piece as well. So it's probably legitimate,
Yeah, yeah.
And we're going to arm wrestle later, you said,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
That's ratings. That's
That's
ratings
ratings,
right
yes.
there. Yeah.
That's what we're after, exactly.
We're gonna have a mud thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know,
Yeah.
Gary.
No,
Gary, I don't know.
No, that's not. Okay, never mind.
But what I find interesting is really that and again I've done the same kinds of research and stuff that Hal has done because as many people that you have citing on one side, you have equal numbers and
Absolutely.
probably more qualified scholars on the other side. And I know that those are inconvenient for Hal to mention that the Attorney General issues a report that says we can control the delegates, we can prevent them from doing anything outside of their scope, and if they do something outside their scope, we can pull them back. I mean, those are inconvenient truths that we don't want to interject into.
But to be my understanding, okay, this is to try to keep it simple.
Yeah.
Because I have to keep it simple because I'm Irish.
Yeah.
So,
Me too.
Me too. So simple's great.
wow. I forget what I'm going to screw up the number. So 3/5. No.
Two-thirds of
okay.
the state.
Three
So
fourths.
I'll describe the process for you.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
So 2/3 of the states say they want a constitutional convention. Okay. Now let's say they get together and that 2/3.
And they want a they don't. It's not a constitutional convention. It's an amendment convention. Those are two different things. So we got to use the right vernacular.
Okay.
This is called Article
I-
5
this is-
convention for the sake
Okay.
of.
Okay. Article 5
Because
convention.
so it's not a constitutional
So
convention.
2/3 of the
Okay.
states.
Well, they used to use the term up until this group COS started, and they
Okay,
did a
okay.
marketing strategy just to confuse
Well,
people.
All right,
but-
wait,
not
wait.
really.
Yeah,
That's
No,
an
really.
incorrect.
it doesn't
No,
matter.
really.
I don't care what the term is.
Okay. But he's not allowed to say what he wants.
Oh, no,
without rebuttal.
Okay,
right?
wait.
We're never going going to get the ratings up now. Yeah.
So anyway, so I'm just trying to simplify.
Yes,
so
yes.
2/3 of the states said we want to go to an Article 5 convention. They all meet at my house. Okay,
Nope. That's not how it works.
Okay.
They don't all meet at your house yet.
Not yet. Okay, so
They all agree.
they all agree to meet.
They say Congress, call the convention. Congress says, great, why don't you meet at Gary's house?
Okay, so Congress says everybody's meeting at Gary's house, so I have to put on an addition.
Yeah, you got to make sure your wife doesn't kick you out.
And
in order for this to
make sure
happen.
my wife doesn't know.
Well, we
about
don't
it.
know how many delegates are going to show up, so you
Okay.
may not need an addition.
Okay, so so there's 100 delegates show up at my house, really cramped, and they say it turns out that Massachusetts has an idea to at the convention to get rid of the Second Amendment. They say we just think that's stupid. It's outdated. 2/3, whatever. Say half. Say they changed the rules, so half of those.
No. So in that convention, half of them can agree. So if a majority of those if Massachusetts convinces more than 50% that that's a good idea, then that can become a proposed amendment.
That's my question. So, at my house, they decide to subvert the Second Amendment. So I blow up the house. No, I can't do that. So, that then, after that, there'd be a succinct amendment that repeals, say, the Second Amendment. That would still have to, as an amendment, go back to each one of the states, and 3/4 of them have to agree to it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So what you would need is
So the worst case scenario Hal comes up with, it still has to go back to the states and be ratified. So, like, for instance, the repeal of the Second Amendment isn't going to happen.
Well, do you know that today, when Congress meets, they could make an amendment to the Constitution, just like getting those states together at your house, and they could propose to repeal the Second Amendment, which is never going to happen, because they know then they have to kick it back to the states and get 3/4 of the states to agree.
But let me-
They're not. Hang on, we're still going here. So the reason they're not going to propose that's like to your point. There's no chance that that thing's ever going to happen.
But
So-
that convention, once it's convened, can go off the rails and
They can't actually. So there's differing opinions about that, and
Okay.
there are legal scholars on both sides of that. And it's actually interesting because you can go all the way back to the very beginning. So in the U.S., we've had 32 conventions
Yes.
in the history of the U.S. Okay.
Right.
Now,
when you say
what-
conventions, what do you mean conventions?
various conventions. I'll define that for you in a moment.
Okay.
So basically, in all of these conventions that these 32 states have had, the founders had a lot of experience with this. They didn't make up Article 5 out of whole cloth saying, like, gee, what are we going to do to rein in, a runaway Congress? They said, we have this experience with conventions. They were using it already. And so they put this tool in place in order to allow them to do that. Madison is the one who proposed that particular amendment. And even Madison states in his Federalist 45, he says that, and I probably could dig up the actual citation, but he says, we have to keep track of the amendments on the similar subjects. Because even in the beginning, they knew it was by subject. But now fast forward, and you've got the ABA, you've got the Justice Department.
No, wait, stop.
Okay.
ABA.
American Bar Association.
Okay, go ahead.
So you've got these different legal scholars who are coming together and saying, like, now it has to be limited to a call. Because if it wasn't, if you take a look at the history, in the history of the U.S., we've had over 750 calls for convention. Now, anybody who's doing basic math can know if you take 50 and you get 2/3 of the states, that only needs 34. So how could you only need 34 calls for convention, and we've had over 750, but we haven't had one of these conventions? Because they have to take place at the same time on the same subject. And that's never happened. We've never had the convergence of all the stars taking place at the same time. And so what has to happen is so we know that it's going to be on the same subject, or Congress would have had to call it already. Like we've had more than 50 or more than 34 calls for convention at the same time into Congress,
Right.
but not same time, same subject, to compel Congress to call this thing so we can go to your house and have a party.
Okay.
All right, Can
Al,
I?
okay, yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
thank you. First off, the founders made the amending process difficult.
Oh, yeah.
Just because that you can possibly have a convention doesn't mean you should have one. And I'm sure they expected debate on the subject. They didn't expect everyone, just because some people wanted one, that it was going to happen.
Right.
And we've never had one. So, and now you mentioned the Justice Department. You're talking about the 1981-82 report?
No, the 87.
87. Well, do you know the story behind that? You probably don't.
I mean, I know the report.
Well, the man that who wrote that,
Edwin Meese.
no, The man who wrote that worked for
it's got the
Orrin
letter
Hatch.
signed by him. So.
Well,
You know.
he was the Attorney General, but he's not the one that wrote the report, okay?
Okay, he's the one who signed the cover letter saying, "Here's my report." Whatever. Yeah.
You want me to give you the history or not, okay?
And anyway,
the man
and
worked
we
for
just
Orrin
got
Hatch.
it.
He worked
Okay,
for
okay.
Orrin Hatch. He left Orrin Hatch's and went on to the Justice Department and wrote that report. That's not the official report of the Justice Department. But even if it is, the convention can
Says
throw it
official.
out.
Yeah.
The convention can throw it out. The delegates don't have to listen to that.
And
Do
on
they?
what basis do the delegates go? So in the history
Because
of the
there are
hang
no
on,
laws
hang on.
guiding
In the-
convention.
In the history of the country, they've never. This is going to be good for ratings now.
No,
In
no,
the
don't get
history
too
of-
out of hand.
Oh, okay. In the history of the country,
Yeah.
we've never gone off the rails, and now all of a sudden
We haven't?
you have decided
You
that we're going to
mentioned
go off
you
the
mentioned
rails.
conventions that took place prior to the Constitution being signed as somehow that will have any precedent to today's convention. You didn't mention the secession conventions, did you?
Describe the secession
The states that
convention.
went together and decided had conventions seceded from the Union.
Right, I thought you guys were supporting that, right?
No, we don't support secession.
Okay, yeah, but the secession
But
convention.
the bottom line is that you're just saying that states had 35 conventions. They had nothing to do with Article 5.
Yeah,
they
but-
had,
Right.
they
And
were
you had
resolving
the
problems of the, among
you
the
had the
states.
Hartford Convention where they were talking about secession in 1814 or 1813.
Yeah, so
So at all the convent, don't just mention these colonial compacts that had no bearing. And
Yeah,
also, Article 1, Section 10 says that states can't form confederations. Okay, it's again
if
without permission from Congress.
if perchance we have an Article 5 convention
Mm-hmm.
and 2/3 of the states agree on it and all 50 states get together at my house, what is the worst possible scenario of that?
Well, there's been over 100 proposed amendments, right?
Yep.
No, maybe they won't repeal the Second Amendment. They've already trashed the Second Amendment without any repeal.
I know. But
They've
anyway,
Let's
trashed
face
a lot
it.
of, they've
Yeah,
trashed,
but-
quite frankly,
Let's
a lot
face
of
it.
Right,
liberties.
right.
And the
Well,
Second
no.
Amendment, by the way, doesn't give us the right to keep our arms. We had that right. It's supposed to protect that right.
okay, anyway.
Okay.
What's the worst possible thing they can the 100 people that show up at my house can do?
Well, they can make fundamental, profound changes.
How?
Throw
And
out.
I'll give you some examples.
Paint right
Mike
on them.
Farris, who is one of the leaders of Convention of States, has proposed a 50-member Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay.
One term, 6 to 8 years. That to me is ludicrous.
Okay.
But there's a lot of people would
Wait.
buy into that today.
So you think he could get 3/4 of the states?
I
to
don't know if
agree
he
to that?
can. You say he can't?
I don't know if he can or not.
I don't know if he can or not either, but it's possible.
Wait, here's
right?
a question for you. Let me just.
What
change
about
up the topic a little
prohibition?
bit.
That will never happen, right? That will never happen,
So
but it
When
did.
did the John Birch Society change its opinion about this? Because
Yeah.
you guys were supporting.
I'm
this up
glad you
until
addressed that
1983.
because that was misinformation you put on that little flyer. In 1975, Larry McDonald, who was a member of the John Birch Society, he and Ron Paul introduced an amendment to
Liberty
repeal the
amendments.
16th Amendment. Yeah, okay. And he did advocate at Article 5. It was strategic, and you mentioned that that was a strategy that's been used to kind of scare Congress. A
Yep.
bad strategy, I would say, but it was a strategy. In fact, the man who started
so
the
this man who has
the man who's-
introduced
you-
this
Wait,
is your
wait.
hero.
now you're,
Let
now
him
you're
finish.
interrupting me.
Okay,
You
okay,
see,
let
yeah,
him
you're,
finish.
yeah. The man who started the Liberty Amendment back in the '60s, Willis Stone, and I had people who knew him personally. They said that they used it as a tool, but he never wanted an Article 5. He said that's the last thing we want. So, but organizations can change their minds.
But Larry McDonald did want an Article 5.
In 1975, he
and
used
he
it as
was
a strategy.
the chairman of your
In
organization.
1975, well, okay, let's get back. Mark Levin, right?
Well, I don't know about Mark Levin.
Well, he
I'm
was against
just
one. You read his book. He was against one,
Okay,
right?
so you guys have changed your
And
mind.
now he's changed his mind.
why
Is that
did-
wrong to change your mind?
Why did you guys
Well,
change
good.
your mind?
Because, well, first off, we never came out in favor of one, okay? And individuals in our organization are free to do whatever they want.
He's the chairman of the
He
organization.
became a
That's not an
chairman. He
individual.
became a chairman in 1983.
Yeah, but I mean, so the chairman of your organization supports an Article 5.
In 1983, did not support Article 5.
You know,
But
Okay,
again,
wait,
what has
wait,
that got
wait.
to do with it?
It really
You
doesn't.
see, this is like
Let's-
a distraction
No,
here.
no, no,
Yeah.
no, no.
We're trying to have fun TV.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but why did Mark Levin? Why was he against one?
I don't know
Hey.
anything about Mark Levin.
Well, you
so-
should know about it because his book is the one that you guys are promoting all over the
anyway,
country.
I'm not
Any-
promoting anybody.
Well, a lot of people are.
Okay,
He and Mike
Well,
Farris
no,
are
hey.
good friends, and they're always talking about
Mark Levin has never invited me over for dinner, so I don't care.
And
Okay,
he
so
didn't invite me either.
So right, okay. So anyway, so we have the party at my house. Congress has said you can have your party. We're having the Gary Hopper huge party. 100 people are there. Plus, we probably need like pages and stuff,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah, and
That'd
cheese
be-
puffs.
And cheese puffs.
Yeah.
pages.
Those little hot dogs in a bun.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, those are good. Those are
Probably,
wicked
yeah,
good.
good party.
For a
So-
meeting like that.
Right, yeah, you need at least that. Okay, so we got pages walking around with cheese buns, and so they
Close enough.
They can propose
okay,
amendments.
Okay, so they propose. Now, I forgot your example was a 50-member Supreme Court.
right.
Okay.
It's still you. I don't understand why you think. Because if that has to come back to the states, that means the states, the voters in each state, have to vote in 3/4 of those states have to vote in favor of a 50-member Supreme Court.
Well, the voters don't do it.
Well, they may do it. We don't know.
There's two means.
Congress
It's-
basically has
Well,
to come back.
what-
There's two ways to get it.
what has happened in the
Ratifying
past?
So
conventions.
here's what happens is, so Congress gets to choose. So this group, if more than 50% of the people say we need a 50-person Supreme Court,
Right.
then that becomes a proposal, and they have to agree on the language, and they would put that forth. Then Congress would decide, how are we going to get this ratified? And they have two ways that they can do that. They can send it back to the state legislatures for ratification, or they can send it back to the states for a state ratification convention.
Okay.
You know, of all the amendments we have, one time we used a state ratification convention.
So then each state would be free to decide?
Nope,
in
they
their
would, they
Congress?
would, they
makes that
would
decision.
either one, Congress would decide either everybody does it by legislature or everybody does it by state
Oh,
convention.
okay, I see. Okay.
And so, for example, when they did, the only time they did it by state convention was the overturning, those 21 on overturning the prohibition.
Okay.
And the reason they went to the
The
convention
Irish
is
Employment Act.
they were concerned that some of the Irish legislators might be tipping too often and they
Yeah.
might not vote correctly, so they let the citizens decide.
That's
that one.
interesting.
No, they
Wow.
didn't think it would pass the legislatures, so they went to these ratifying committees. That's how I think we were able to
Okay.
pass it. And just so easy to
But
control.
what,
a
I-
small
what, I- yeah,
group.
Yeah.
But what I'm
Well,
what
let me
I'm
just
getting at
mention,
it.
I mentioned one proposal. If you read Mark Levin's proposed amendments, he wants states to be able to write amendments. 2/3 of the states. He wants states to have the power to override certain bills. They have something called a balanced budget amendment. Sounds really nice, doesn't it? I want a constitutional budget. There's nothing in this in the Convention of States that will have a constitutional budget.
Yeah.
You have a balanced budget. What do you have to do if you don't cut the size of government? You got to raise taxes.
Well, but
or
see,
have
that's
VAT tax.
that's a
Right.
misunderstanding of the
No,
balance.
it's not a misstatement.
Well,
Does it address the Federal Reserve Bank?
It's a
no.
misunderstanding
They don't
of
touch
the
that with a
balance.
10-foot
okay,
pole.
wait. So, but still, the worst case scenario is the convention at my house. They get together and they say they want a balanced budget, and you still have to get 3/4 of the states to agree to it.
That's right.
Many of which already have balanced budget constitutional amendments to their own.
That's right.
Just to be clear, it's not even just 3/4. You have to get both houses in all the states, which basically means
ratifying
So,
Okay,
so
but
in
if
other
it's
words,
by the-
for something really crazy to happen is extremely unlikely.
But
In
what's
other
crazy?
But a
What's crazy?
meteor,
We
a
use that
meteor
term.
could
What's
land on
crazy?
this studio at this moment.
What's crazy though? Last year, the Wolfpack. This is the left-wing side of the Article 5 proponents, right? Convention proponents. They said the same thing. Crazy amendments will never pass. Well, what's crazy to a Wolfpack person?
Right.
A little different than
that's
from
what
a progressive.
that's what I'm
Right.
getting at. Is that
And by the way, you say that we'll never do anything crazy. States do crazy things all the time without any help from
No.
Article 5.
right?
You know, right
Yeah,
now,
yeah,
you got
states-
Common Core.
States do crazy things.
Yeah.
However, getting 3/4 of the states to do a
To
crazy
simultaneously do this.
Well, let me
simultaneously-
give you
The
two
same
examples.
crazy thing.
Let me give you two examples of crazy things that states have either stepped back or have done very little. First, Common Core. 46 states, many of them Republican strongholds, adopted
Yeah,
Common
but can I
Core.
just say, that is really outside of the
No, it's
scope of
not
this
outside.
conversation.
No,
Do I get
it's
to
not
talk, or does he
outside.
just get to
You're-
keep saying no,
You're
wrong?
telling me that states
How-
won't do anything crazy they already have.
So, but how?
Okay.
So even in New Hampshire, Common Core didn't come to the legislature. It didn't come to a ratifying convention.
is now.
It isn't. now.
It isn't. So how the problem is that you're kind of mixing apples and oranges. I mean, that's like saying that So it's a ludicrous proposal. It's a bad example on your part.
example.
Yeah.
great example that you
No, because it didn't. Article 5 has structure and it has process. And what you just
process.
your example, we just described the structure of legislatures have to do it, or the convention has to do it.
There is no laws guiding convention.
Hal,
Well, you seem that there is, but there
Well,
not
no. Well, I'm sorry. We just described it. You want me to read Article 5 again for you?
Article 5
you
doesn't
guys-
set the guidelines for a convention.
We just said ratification. There's two ways: the state legislators ratify it,
Wait,
or the convention
you guys
ratified
did-
it. Common Core didn't get through either of those processes in any of the states.
From the feds to the states.
But
Yes,
it didn't
it did.
go through. But anything coming out of that convention has to come. The Article 5 says it gets approved by the legislatures or it gets approved in a state convention.
Right.
Common Core didn't go through either of those processes. So for
I,
you to
as a
say,
legislator, never got to vote.
Exactly.
On whether
That's
to-
correct. But you've had
but
it
he
for what-
would if the crazy idea
You've
comes out
had
of
it for
a
3
hang
years
on,
and you haven't got rid of it. How come you guys haven't got rid of it?
if the crazy idea comes out of his house, Congress is going to send it back to the legislators, or he's going to send it back to a state ratification
You know,
convention.
there's a lot of crazy ideas come out
Well,
of
you
my
think the
house.
federal
Yeah.
government should, the taxpayers' money should fund elections? That's what one of the crazy ideas. But you ask the average person on the street, they're going to probably go along with it because they don't understand the Constitution.
Yeah, but you got to trust the people to some
What people?
point.
What people do we trust?
The voters.
What did Thomas Jefferson say?
Hal's shtick is
Do not
he-
put your
hang on.
faith in people. Bind them. Do not put your faith in
Since
men.
1983, when Hal's organization changed their mind, they have gone. They have
Frank,
started.
wait, wait.
Hang on. Can I talk or to see if
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
talking
you
to my
keep
ear?
on
making a misstatement here, right?
So
Okay.
when in 1983, when
Okay.
Hal's organization, when the chairman
Okay.
of Hal's organization,
Soviet shot his plane down.
yeah, exactly. So when the
Anyway.
chairman of Hal's organization was no longer the chairman, so since that time, Hal's organization has said we need to fix this problem, and at that time there was 1.4 trillion dollars in debt. Today we got 18 trillion on our way
Right,
to
and it's
a
our
huge
fault
number.
because we
No,
didn't have a
so
balanced budget amendment
strategically,
convention, yeah.
we need to
Yeah.
be doing something to intervene. More tactics of fear and intimidation, or really just misinformation.
Intimidation.
What we really need to do is we need to do something to try and move this ball forward. And Article 5 is the Constitution. These guys want to love the Constitution. If they don't like Article 5, a state convention, what else in the Constitution don't you like? I mean, is it maybe these guys are worried about the Second Amendment and
No,
they want to
Frank,
take that away?
I just
What
already addressed
else in the
that. I already addressed that, Frank. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I said
guys,
the founders made it
We're-
difficult.
hey,
They didn't say because COS wants to have one, we have to have
Okay,
one.
anyway.
Because Mark Levin's selling books, we have to have one. There's a debate on the subject, right?
Okay, Hal.
And by the way, our organization never endorsed it. Okay.
Hal, look
so
I know
people
that
making that misstatement.
the end of the United States as we know it is not the responsibility of the John Birch Society. I know that personally.
Well, they
I'm
make this
okay with-
they make this
I know, wait,
ridiculous
wait, wait, wait.
accusation.
Anyway, we're out of time.
Good.
Okay, good.
No, not. I wish we had more time.
What about
No.
a compromise? What if there's an Article 5 convention to get rid of Article 5?
Or how about if we have an Article 6 convention?
How much
Right.
time do we have?
Huh?
How
Or a
much- how much
Article
time do we
7
have?
convention.
We're out of
We're
time,
actually out of
actually,
time.
which
We're
is
out-
unfortunate. I wish
Yeah,
we could.
we're supposed to quit at like
was-
5 of.
this is fun,
It's
but-
5 of.
It's been good.
Yeah.
Hopefully we
Good.
generated some TV, tried to get a
Hal,
little action
Dan,
going.
Frank, thank you guys very
Yeah,
much.
thank you, guys.
I think it was informative.
Yes.
I learned something. I learned that we're gonna have a wicked party at my house.
Your
if this
electric
ever gets
bill's gonna be
going.
huge.
Oh yeah. And then we got to get those little hot dog things.
Yes,
We gotta
yes.
get the hot dog.
Yes.
Okay, hey, thank you. See you next
Bye,
week, guys.
everybody.